that enthralled with the military, but because rumor had it that if you went to the service academy, you got paid every month. Didn't pay me, Case wouldn't pay me, no, but the Air Force did. Walked to the doors there. It was about me getting through there. And what did I face as soon as I walked to those doors? Right away, it says, integrity first, service before self, excellence in all you do. Right from Elizabeth. Elizabeth said, serve, young man. Culver said, serve, young man. The Air Force says, serve, young man. And there I am at the Service Academy, learning my craft, learning about being an engineer, doing all that great stuff. And then one day, boom, you're in the real Air Force with real people. People like my cousin over here, William Ward. William, stand up. You know, that's why I bring my back up. William, stand up. He served 20 years in the United States Air Force. That man is a servant leader. Besides William, there's so many other great ones here. Right now, this day, I have some servant leaders with me. I have my coffee group. Who knew? My coffee group would show up en masse in the back. All you guys and gals, stand up for just a second. The coffee group shows up because we believe in service. But wait, fellas, who knew? Blair's over here. He's a service person. I learned a lot on that journey about service. And then it opened my eyes about the American veteran. On that journey, for the first time, I realized that my grandfather had served during World War II. Those old veterans never talk about their service. They just don't. My father served in Korea. Didn't know until I put on that uniform in 1973 because I came home on the bus. I got off the bus in downtown Cleveland, right down the street. Got off the bus, and there were protesters there cursing me out for being in a military uniform. I didn't know. I'm 15. I thought I was doing right. I thought I was doing good. You baby killer. All of a sudden, I'm understanding what our veterans are going through by just serving their nation. Many of them were just young kids who did what they were asked for our nation. And that's why we're here today, because we want to recognize all those young kids and those that have grown into those that are here today. It's about that service. You know, when those guys went and they never asked for anything. They did their duty, they came home, and they went back to work. They are the underpinnings of our society. They are there in the breach in our schools. They're there in the breach on our police force. They're there in the breach as doctors, lawyers. They're there in the breach cleaning our streets. The veteran is everywhere, and most of us don't even realize it. It's because they believe in that thing that brought us all together when we went through basic training. At the end of the day, you are no longer a black man. You are no longer a white man. You are not even no longer a man or a woman. You were an American warfighter. You were a service man, and we all wear it. That was our unifier. That we're all here to serve our nation. And we believed in those values. We lived out those values. We were bringing different things to the table, but by the time we finished our training, we were one. We were one. So it's about service today. It's always been about service, and that's why we have that term, service. Our service people do great things every single day. They don't ask for much, and I'm so happy that we have people here, like those in this audience, who will come up to a service person and say, thank you for your service. But you know what, Americans? We want to thank you too, because you're the reason we do what we do. We do what we do so you can live out your dreams, so you can continue to create this great nation, so you continue to grow this great nation, so that you can continue what we've been doing since way back in 1776. And we're going to continue for another 100 years because we are that shining symbol. We are. Our values resonate. We may slip and slide, but our values resonate. We care about the least of us. We care about each other, and we care about our nation. So God bless all the veterans, and God bless all of you. And thank you for spending this time with us on this wonderful day and realizing that many didn't come back, but we still remember them. God bless you and thank you.
I didn't bring this one either. My name is Ted Prosty, and I have the honor of being the president of the Cuyahoga County Soldiers and Sailors Monument Commission. So if you ask me what I do, I listen to what Greg has to say, and otherwise, I guess I'm the chief volunteer. This space is about service. This date is about service. All the names you see on the wall are those from the county who served in the American Civil War from this county. You can't tell who survived the war and who didn't by looking at those names. Some 1,100 of the 9,000 passed away during the war as part of their service. And remember what service is. It's that moment of entry into this greater cause. But everyone that raised their hand and took that oath knew somewhere inside that you were prepared to give up all the rest of your days for your nation. And if there's not a sobering moment in your life, that is one. I remember it in 1971, right down the street here, as I joined the United States Navy. It's a moment that not only sobers one, but brings you to adulthood in a rapid pace. It's particularly appropriate today that our own panel not only captures this concept, what was the war about? And remember where we are. We are here in the center of the Western Reserve of Connecticut, settled after the American Revolution, but this portion was reserved for folks from Connecticut to come out here, and then the firelands for those that lost their homes. They brought with them a tradition that resulted pre-Constitution in the Northwest Ordinance and in no slavery from that moment on in this territory. So we, Ohio, are the first state that was formed out of that Northwest Territory, a state in which slavery was never allowed. But we fought a fight throughout that time period. And the folks you see on particularly in this one panel on the Emancipation Proclamation, spent decades arguing to limit slavery. And the war came. And one of the things that came out of that war was some 200,000 black men, free and former slaves, who fought, who sat, stood, took that oath of office, received the arms, and went out and fought, and many died in that process. So a sea change happened at that time, and this space remembers it. And we, here today, and in the years to come, remember those men and women, living and dead, who have served the nation in this role, who've been willing to make that ultimate sacrifice so that we have the freedom to spend our days doing these things. I want to thank you for your attention, and Doc War for that inspiring talk, and I appreciate your time.
I want to apologize to those online that may have not been able to hear the beginning of our ceremony. We had audio issues, so we did restart the stream about midway through. Hopefully, everyone is able to jump on at this point and be able to hear us, especially since we will be reading the names of the 27th 27th U.S. Colored Troops after our closing remarks here. We will close with taps, our formal ceremony, and then we will move into our reading of those names. It is in honor of the reopening of the African American Civil War Museum in Washington, D.C. They had a major redesign of their galleries and are reopening today. So over the entire country, across the entire country, they are reading the more than 300,000 U.S. colored troops that answered that call after the Emancipation Proclamation formed those regiments. The 27th is the 2nd Regiment out of Ohio. The 5th is being read by Oberlin Historical Society in Oberlin, Ohio. So we are proud to have them reading as well, and hopefully you'll stay to join us. Those of you that are reading along with us, we will have 2 microphones going at the same time. Well, not at the same time, one after another, but we'll have one person on deck while one person is reading. And we will start with Dr. War, who will help us out with the first group, and then Ted with the second, and then we'll flow from there one after another, reading through those names. So thank you very much for joining us for that. To close out today's ceremony, I would like to say thank you again to Dr. War, to Ted, to our presenters. Thank you for your service. Thank you for your service not only today, but in wartime, peacetime, and beyond. So thank you very much. Thank you to those family members of service members. I am one of those, and I know we are feeling that ourselves every day that we have our hearts out of our chest out and in a uniform. Okay, so if you will please rise, we'll end with the playing of taps. Sorry about that. Thank you very much. For those that are staying, we will wrap around the side here. You'll be coming and going from this side over here. Those of you who cannot stay the whole time, this will take a while. There are over 1,500 names, so we will be here quite a while. Please stay if you can. If you are looking for something else fun to do, we are also being represented over at the Salute to Our Veterans at Cleveland City, at the Skylight Park in Tower City. The city is beginning their parade. I think we may hear the parade coming. They will, it doesn't kick off till 12:30. So you have a chance if you want to run over to get in the parade. Parade is at 12:30. It will come through Public Square here and will end at Tower City, where they'll be having a festival for veterans. So there are a lot of services and groups and organizations there represented in the atrium at Tower City. So please feel free to head over there at any point as well. You can be seated, and we'll start with our reading of the names. As a little bit of a background, the 27th USCT On this Veterans Day, we gather in gratitude to honor all who have worn our nation's uniform, and at this time to pay special tribute to the brave men of the 27th United States Colored Troops, as well as those USCT troops included on our walls. This ceremony is part of a national reading of the names of every soldier who served in the United States Colored Troops during the Civil War, a remembrance coordinated by the African American Civil War Museum in Washington, D.C., as it proudly reopens its museum and monument after an extensive redesign of its galleries. The 27th U.S. Colored Troops were organized on January 16, 1864, at Camp Delaware, Ohio. These men fought with the Army of the Potomac and the 25th Corps in some of the hardest campaigns of the war, from the Wilderness and Petersburg to Fort Fisher and Wilmington. They marched through Virginia and North Carolina until the surrender of the Confederate forces marked the end of the war and the preservation of the Union. They fought not only for the nation's freedom, but for their own and for the generations who would follow. Their courage helped to shape the promise of America. Today, as we join with voices across the country in this reading of names, we honor the men of the 27th U.S. Colored Troops, and through them, all the veterans who have served in defense of liberty, justice, and equality. May their names remind us of the price of freedom and the enduring strength of the American spirit.
Alexander Adams, James Adams, Smith Adams, Stephen Adams, John H. Adley, John Agnes, Charles Aries, Charles Akins, Alexander L. Stott, Henry Alexander, honored on our walls, James Alexander, honored on our walls, Joseph Alexander, Thomas Alexander, William Alexander, John Allen, Owen Allen, Robert Allen, Thomas Allen, William Allen, David Alston, Wesley Alston, Benjamin Amber, William B. Ames, Archie Anderson, Benjamin Anderson, Charles Anderson, honored on our walls, George Anderson, Jackson Anderson, Jesse Anderson, John Anderson, Joseph Anderson, Silas Anderson, honored on our walls. Our next reader, please.
William Anderson, honored on our walls. William J. Anderson, Aaron Ainsley, David Archer, Jackson Archer, Basil Ames, Richard Armstrong, Jordan Connors, Frederick T. Arnold, Edward Arthur, William Arthur, Watson T. Artis, Jesse Artis, Moses M. Artis, Nicholas Ash, James Ashland, George Ansell, William James Atkins, Daniel W. Atwood, Lemuel Austin, Salathiel Austin, Samuel Austin, George Bass, Benjamin Bailey, John Bailey, Logan Bailey, George Bailey, Charles Baker, John Baker, Henry H. Staff, William H. Walden, Jackson Baldock, honored on our walls.
James Bayless, Pleasant O. Banks, Anthony Banks, Eaton Banks, Harrison Banks, Isaiah Banks, Simon Banks, Augustus Ban, Aaron Banner, James Banner, Luke Bannister, William Barber, Harrison Barnes, James Barnett, John Barney, John Barrett, Thomas Barrett, Jeremiah Bars, honored on our walls, Frederick J. Barlett, Henry Bascom, Armand Bass, James E. Bass, John Bass, Joseph W. Bass, William Bass, Jordan Bates, Houston Bayless, Morris Bays, Claiborne Bazil, George Beasley, Franklin Beatty, John N. Beatty.
Charles A. Beery, Thomas Bell, Matt Benford, John Bennett, Ransom Bennett, honored on our wall, John Berlin, John Burney, George Barrett, Bull Barrett, James Best, James Beverly, William Bias, Thomas Bibb, Edward Biggs, William Gibbons, Everett Bird, Henry Bird, Hiram Birch, Isaiah Burks, James D. Bishop, James Black, John Black, Joseph Black, honored on our walls, Albert Blackman, Charles Blanchard, William F. Blanchard, Wesley Blue, William Blue, Alan Carson.
Robert D. Bowe. Tony will take it. Peter Bogan. Alan Bolden. William H. Bolden. John Bowles. Louis Bomey. Alexander Bond. William Booker. Andrew Boone. John Boreb. Henry Bowden. John Bowles. Reddick Bowens. Reddick Bowers. Struther Bowles. Champion Bowman. Honored on our walls, John Bowman. Moses Bowser. Wilson Bowser. Esom Boyd. Lee Boyd. John Bracken. Albert Bradford. William Bradwell. James Brady. Oscar Brady. Moses Bragg. George Brady. William Brady. James W. Bray. Isaac Breckenridge. Robert Breckenridge.
George H. Bruin, George H. Brewer, Thomas J. Brewer, William H. Brewer, James Bryce, Thomas Brigg, Caswell Briggs, William Wood, Krista, William Broadwell, Daniel Brooks, James Brooks, John Brooks, Randall Brooks, William Brooks, Alexander Brown, Andrew J. Brown, Austin Brown, Benjamin Brown, Calendar Brown, Dennis Brown, Edward B. Brown, Elias Brown, George Brown. Honored on our walls, Henry Brown, Isaac Brown, Jacob Brown, James Brown, Jeremiah Brown. Honored on our walls, John Brown. Honored on our walls, John H. Brown, John T. Brown, Joseph Brown.
Louis Brown, Richard Brown, Robert Brown, William Brown, William E. Brown, William M. Brown, Jerry Bruce, Josiah H. Bruce, Samuel J. Brewston, George W. Bryan, George W. Bryant, Ludwig Byron, Harvey Buchanan, John Buckner, Elijah Bunch, Ezra B. Bird, James C. Burden, John Burden, Andrew Burdu, Asa Burke, Charles Burke, Liam Burke, George Burke. Honored on our walls, John H. Burke, Arthur Berkshire, Ira Burns, James Burns, Richard Burns, William H. Burns, Randolph Burr, John Burrow, Albert Burton.
James Burrell, Samuel Busby, Jordan Bush, John Butcher, Joseph Butcher, Morrison Butcher, Charles W. Butler, Dayberry O. Butler, Elbridge Butler, William Bayard, William Byron, Ezra Bird. Honored on our walls, Gaston Ableton, William Caesar, Samuel Kane, Solomon Kane. Honored on our walls, Walter Kane, Zebedee Kane, Alexander Cardwell, S. Edward Collins, Dennis Calamers, George Calloway, Rockfield Calloway, Henry Caldwell, George Campbell, Miles Campbell, William H. Campbell, John R. Kane, Zebediah Kane, Robert Cannon, John Canty, Creighton Capels.
Thomas Carney, Abram Carpenter, William Carter, James R. Carruthers, James Carson. Honored on our walls, Andrew J. Carter, George W. Carter, Henry Carter, John Carter, Major Carter, Harry Carter, Randolph Carter. Honored on our walls, William A. Carter, John Carter, Henry Carruthers, Richard Casper, Dudley Casper, George Cash, Charles J. Castle, Creighton Castle, Jacob L. Causey, James Chapman, Anderson Chambers, David Chambers, John H. Chambers, Milton Chambers, Reuben Chambers, William Chambers, William Channel, Alfred Chapman, James Chapman.
John C. Charles, James Charles, Albert Chapman, Herbert Shallows, Alexander Shallows, Jared Shallows, James Shallows, Samuel Christian, James Churchman, Charles W. Clark, Edward Clark, John Clark, Joseph Clark, Thomas Clark, William Clark, Daniel W. Clark, Henry Clay, Henry C. Clay, Henry W. Clay, Isaac Clay, Thomas Clay, William Clay Brooke, John Clinton, Samuel Ford, Robert E. Cole, Samuel Cole, Cyrus Cole, James Coleman, Frank Coleman, John Coleman, William Coleman, Edward Coleman.
This way? Okay, hold on. Jesse Kohler, Jacob Colin, John H. Colin, Ross Colin, Dave Coleman, William Coulter, Alexander Colwell, Mark Colwell, John B. Corner, Albert Conrad, Jerry Conrad, Daniel Cook, Thomas Cook, William Cook, John Cooley, LeWard Copper, Richard Copper, Marshall Conrad, Marshall Conrad, George Cordell, James A. Cordell, Francis Cardine, Aaron Corella, Samuel Cannell, Samuel Carell, Solomon Carrolls, Edmund Carrolls, John D. Cousins, Calvin Conwin, Lawson Conwin, Samuel Conwell, and Robert Colwis. Thank you.
Isaiah Conway, Richard Cox, Horace Cozens, John Craven, Alfred H. Craig, James Crane, James Crockett, William Crockett, Emmanuel Crowder, Fleming Crump, Thomas Crump, Alan Henry Cruz, Henry Carruthers, John Cumberland, Edward Cummings, Jacob Curtis, William Curtis, Michael Dyers, Alan Dansby, Alfred Danbridge, Pleasant Dangster, Stephen Daniels, William Darlington, Edward Davidson, Isaac Davidson, Alvin Davis, Charles W. Davis, George Davis, John Davis, Obadiah Davis, William Davis.
Thomas Davis, William Davis, James Davison, Jethro Davison, Edward Dawson, Henry Day, Charles Didgett, William Deed, John T. Defty, Thomas Delaney, Anderson Dennis, Henry Dempsey, Anderson Dennis, Augustus Dennison, Johnson Dent, Aurelius Depp, John T. Depp, Robert DeVoe, Wesley Dickens, Chancellor Dickinson, Moses Dickerson, Edmund Dickey, Jeremiah Dickens, Alexander Dickinson, William Dimery, Samuel Dinwiddie, William C. Dinwiddie, James Ditcher, David Dix, Alexander Dixon, Nelson P. Dixon, Clark Dobson, Daniel Dosel.
John B. Dolby, Wiley Dolby, Richard Goins, John W. Donlin, George W. Yoki, John Dowd, Stephen A. Douglas, George W. Dudgeon, James W., Joseph W., William C. Dunkhorst, David Dupree, John C. Duster, James Earl, David Early, George Early, Henry Early, Monroe Early, Jacob Lees, John Everhart, Albert Edmund, Charles Edwards, Urban Edwards, Isaac Edwards, John W. Edwards, William Edwards, John Elam, John Elder, Griffin Elliott, Martin Elliott. Honored on our walls, George Ellis, Isaiah Ellison.
Charles Elwood, Andrew Eli, James Emmon, Alexander Evans, Andrew Evans, John Evans, Richard Evans, Thomas H. Evans, Walker D. Evans, Joseph Everett, John W. Ewing, Harrison Fabron. Honored on our walls, Gustav W. Favrion, William Fain, Oscar Fairfax, Samuel H. Fairfax, John Falls, Franklin Fawley, John Fawley, Oscar Farthing, James Farbush, Azamiah Faxton, Samuel Fergus, George Ferguson, James Ferguson, William Phibbs, Warren Field, Grandison Fields, William Finch, James Finley, Jefferson Finley, Joseph Finley.
Oscar Finley, Rush Finley, Isaac Fisher, James R. Fleming. Honored on our walls, Alexander Fletcher, William J. Fletcher, Benjamin Flowers, Henry Flowers, Daniel Floyd, Jefferson Floyd. Honored on our walls, Frank J. Ford, John Ford, John A. Ford, Edward Fortune, Daniel Fawcett, Frank Fox, Richard Fox, Robert Fox, William Fox, Alberta Freeman, Benjamin Franklin, Albert Freeman, Enoch Freeman, Nimrod Freeman, David Fry, James Ferguson, John Ferguson, John Ferguson, William Ferguson, John Gaines, Calvin Gales.
Israel Gaines, George Calloway, Thomas Gaines, James G. Garrett, Isaac Gardner, honored on our wall, Samuel Gardner, Henry Garrett, Thomas Garrett, Franklin Garrison, James M. Garrison, Nelson Garrison, Henry Garvin, Ferdinand Gaskins. Honored on our wall, Charles Gates, Henry Canton, Anderson Galt, George Grotches, Reuben Grotz, John Gay, James D. Gells, John George, George Gibson, Henry H. Gibson, Henry Gifford, George L. Gilbert, Charles H. Gixon, James Gillard, Wilson Gillard, James D. Gillis, Henderson C. Gillespie, John Gillespie, Levi H. Gillespie, William Gillum, Charles W. Gilmore, Thomas Gladish, John Gleason, William Godfrey, William Goines, Gaston Good, George H. Good, William E. Good, Yancey Good, John B. Gordon, Thomas Graston, James Graham, John H. Graham, Abraham Grant, Wavy Grant, David Graves, David Gray, George Gray, James Gray, on our wall, Nicholas A. Gray, Charles J. Graham, James A. Grayson. On the walls, William Grayson, James Green, Joseph A. Green, Lewis Green, Thomas Green, Warmley Green, Robert E. Green, John T. Gray, and James Griffey.
Charles Grimes, Charles Wilmington Grimes, William H. Grimes, George Grossi, Louis A. Gross, Samuel Groves, Simon Dew, Anderson Golifor, James Hackley, Robert Hackley, Wesley Haynes, George Heaney, William W. Hall, Sanford Hall, Alexander Haverstock, Benjamin Hamilton. Honor on our walls, George W. Hamilton, Lewis Hamilton, Charles Hamilton, James Hammond, Dennis Handy, James W. Handy, William Hanna, James Hackley, William Harding, John J. Hargrove, Benjamin Hargrove, Thomas Hargrove, Nicholas Harr, David Harnish, Alfred Harris, Gabriel Harris, George Harris, George C. Harris, Henry Harris, James Harris. Honored on our walls, John A. Harris, John W. Harris, Samuel Harris, Thomas Harris, Thornton Harris, William Harris, Henry Harrison, Jordan Harrison, William Harrison, William H. Harrison, John Harry, James N. Hart, John Hart, Peter Hart, Thomas A. Hartwell, Albert Harvey, Alexander Harvey, George W. Harvey, Doc Hatchett, Doc Hathaway, John Hathcock, Sterling Hathcock, William Hathcock, Aaron Hawkins, Horace Wilkins, Joseph Hawkins, Samuel Hayden, Tecumseh Hayes.
Charles Hayes, Charles W. Hayes, Thomas Hayes, William Hayes, Franklin Haywood, Lewis Haywood, Thomas Haywood, Richard Hedgepath, Alexander S. Hempstead, Adam Henderson, Charles W. Henderson, John H. Henderson, Michael Henderson, Henry Hennison, Alfred Henry, Orrin Henry, William Henry, Harry Hensley, Isaac Houston, Archie Hicks, John W. Hicks, Joseph Hicks, Barney Hittard, Peter Higginbottom, honored on our walls, Charles Higgins, Thomas Heighton, Gideon Hill, James Hill, John Hill, John F. Hill, Matthew Hill, Noah Hill.
Peter Hill, William Hill, William H. Hill, John Hillman, Abraham Hawarden, Henry Hick, Peter Hodge, William Hoffman, Arkia Hogan, Joseph Hogan, Peter Hogan, Everett Hogans, Stephen Hollins, Hines Holloway, William Holly, Austin Holmes, Jackson Hood, Charles Hopkins, Alexander Hornberger, William Horace, John Horton, Thomas A. Orwell, Isla Houston, George E. Howard, John W. Howard, Frank A. Howell, Peter Howell, Thomas Howell, Greenville Hubbards, William Hubbard, Andrew J. Huggard, Charles Huggins.
Carter Hughes, Daniel Hughes, George W. Hughes, Jerry Hughes, John H. Hughes, Josiah Hughes, William Hughes, Aaron Hunt, John A. Hunt, Samuel Hurst, Jethro Hurst, Dudley Hutchison, Sanders Huys, John Isaacs, Alexander Jackson, Andrew Jackson, Edward A. Jackson, Harrison Jackson, Henry Jackson, Isaac Jackson. Honored on our walls from the 5th USCT, John Jackson, John B. Jackson, John R. Jackson, John W. Jackson, Levi Jackson. Honored on our walls from the 5th USCT, Lewis Jackson, Matthew Jackson, Richard Jackson, Samuel Jackson. Honored on our walls, William E. Jackson, Willis Jackson, James H. James.
Richard James, William H. James, Albert Jameson, Gilbert Jefferson, Marion D. Jeffries, Benjamin Jenkins, Thomas Jenkins, William H. Jenkins, John D. Jewell, James W. Johns, Alexander Johns, Alfred Johnson, Amos Johnson, Anthony Johnson, Benjamin Johnson, Cornelius Johnson, David Johnson, Dick Johnson. Honored on our walls, Edward E. Johnson, Foster Johnson. Honored on our walls, George Johnson, Israel Johnson, James Johnson. Honored on the walls, James F. Johnson, Jeremiah Johnson, John Johnson, John H. Johnson, Leonard Johnson. Honored on the walls, Lewis Johnson, Lewis Johnson, Lucius Johnson, Martin Johnson, Nathaniel Johnson, Robert Johnson, Samuel Johnson, Thomas Johnson. Honored on the walls, William Johnson, William F. Johnson, Wyatt Johnson, Zachariah Johnson, John H. Johnson, Joseph Johnson, William Johnson. Honored on our walls, Albert G. Jones, Charles Jones, Charles H. Jones, George Jones, George F. Jones, Grayson Jones, Henry Jones, Jacob B. Jones, James Jones, John Jones, John C. Jones, Joseph H. Jones. Honored on our walls, Moses Jones, Richard Jones. Honored on our walls, Richard N. Jones, Robert Jones, Shedwick Jones, Thomas Jones. Honored on the walls, Thomas A. Jones, Thomas E. Jones, William Jones.
Honor on our walls, William F. Jones, Wilson Jones, William Jordan, Charles Julius, John Canada, Basil Kelly, Nelson Kennedy, Francis Kimmerling. Honor on our walls, Beverly King, George W. King, Joseph King, Joshua King, Samuel King, John Kinnan, William Kinnan, William H. Kinnan, James Kaiser, Joseph Lacrosse, George Lamb, Jesse Lamb. Honor on our walls, Pleasant Langston, Frank K. Larabe, Edward C. Latimer, John W. Lavis, Isaac Lawrence, James Laws, Benjamin F. Lay, Robert Lynch, Louis M. Lean, Abraham Liss, Alexander Lee, George M. Lee.
John W. Lee, Pompey Lee, Doc Leach, David Leakins, David Leggins, James O. Lang, Alex Lysander, Thomas Leslie, honored on our walls, Austin Letcher, Alvin Lett, Charles Lewis, Charles H. Lewis, Hamilton Lewis, Henry W. Lewis, honored on our walls, Hugh Lewis, Jacob N. Lewis, James Lewis, Jesse Lewis, Joseph H. Lewis, Walker Lewis, Alec Lysander, Morris Lyle, Kreth Littleton, Charles W. Long, Robert Long, Jerome Lord, Charles Lewis, John Lewis, Joseph Love, Peter Lowry, Edward Lucas, George H. Lucas.
Isaac Lucas, James E. Lucas, John C. Lucas, Napoleon N. Lucas, William Lucas, Thomas H. Lux, George W. Lyon, William Marbury, Jacob McAfee, Nelson Matchin, Samuel Mackerel, Frank Madison, James Madison, Cornelius Mail, Isaac Mail, James H. Marber, Hansel Malone, James A. Malone, Andrew Manley, very good, Manley, George Mann, William D. Mann, Louis Mannering, John Manziel, Robert Manson, Willis Marion, Henry Markham, John Markham, William March, James Marshall, Thornton Marshall, William L. Marshall.
Joseph Martin, Robert Martin, Solomon Martin, James Mays, Robinson McAllister, John McCall, David McAllister, Edward L. McCauley, Benjamin McCoglin, Fielding McCoglin, John McCoglin, Charles H. McGowan, James R. McGowan, Ben McCoy, honored on our walls, Jacob McCoy, Samuel McCrude, Henderson McDonald, John McDonald, honored on our walls, William McDonald, Nathan McElhaney, Anson McFarland, James McGee, William McGee, Hamilton McGill, William McGill, George McGowan, Silas McIntosh, Nathaniel McKinney, Julius McKnight, Washington McLaren, Nathan M. McLaughlin, Lewis McLean.
Edwin T. McMurphy, Eugene McRice, George Mickens, William P. Malton, French Manelfly, Richmond Mendenhall, Frederick Merritt, Robert Mickens, William Miffin, John Miles, William Miles, Kristen Miller, honored on our walls, Christopher Miller, James A. Miller, John Miller, Philip Miller, Samuel Miller, Thomas C. Miller, Boone Milton, Daniel L. Minor, Eli Mitton, Daniel Mescal, Alan Mitchell, Charles Mitchell, George Mitchell, James Mitchell, Matthew R. Mitchell, Charles Morris, Thomas Moline, Moses Monday, John A. Moon, Amos Morton,
David Moody, John Moody, Charles Moore, Henry Moore, James Moore, Jesse Moore, Hamilton Moore, Jeremiah Moore, John Moore, Robert Moore, honored on our walls, William Moore, Willis Moore, William Moorhead, Archibald Morgan, honored on our walls, Benjamin Morgan, William Morgan, John A. Morin, Charles Morris, Finley Morris, Jeremiah Morris, honored on our walls, James Morrison, Sidney Moores, Wilson T. Morton, Preston Mosby, Preston Mosley, Joseph Moten, honored on our walls, William A. Mott, Thomas Moulin, Robert Moulton, Amos A. Mount, Wallace Morning, William Mumford.
Isaac Munson, honored on our walls. Also honored on the walls, William Munson. Daniel Murphy, honored on our walls, John Murphy. Randolph Meyer, Charles H. Myers, Green Myers, Byron Nance, Charles Nance, Alexander Naper, Simon Neal, Herman Niedermeyer, William G. Nelson, Moses Nelson, Samuel Nelson, Squire Nelson, William Nelson, Edward Newby, William Nogan, John W. Newland, Gifford Newman, Ignatius Newman, Richard Newman, William Newsom, Robert Nickens, H. Niedenheimer, H.C. Noakes, Edward Noble, Isaac Noble, Henry Nooks, Lewis Norris, and David Nukes.
Abraham Nutter, George A. Nutter, George W. Oder, Stephen Overman, Silas Owens, Benjamin Owsley, Preston Page, Thomas Page, Washington Page, James H. Payne, William Payne, Abraham Palmer, Levi Palmer, Philip Palmer, Washington Palmer, John Parchment, Alfred Parker, Charles Parker, Thornton Parker, Archie Parks, George Palmer, James W. Palmer, William Parsons, Andrew J. Patterson. Honored on our walls, Clarence H. Patterson, Henry L. Patterson, Henry S. Patterson, John Patterson, Samuel Patterson, Thomas Patterson, Henry Patterson, Isaac F. Paul.
Americus Payne, Garnison Payne, Henry Payne, Jesse A. Payne, John Payne, Thomas Payne, William Payne, Richard Peck, Charles Perkins, Peter Perkins, Commodore Perry, Thomas Perry, Samuel Petty, Franklin Phillips, George Phillips, John W. Phillips, honored on our walls, Henry Pickett, Frank Pierce, Henry Person, honored on our walls, Jefferson Pinckney, Alfred Pinney, James Piper, James Pinnon, Simon P. Pleasant, William Pleasance, Joseph Dexter, James K. Polk, George Porter, James Porter, Louis Porter, Samuel Porter, Anderson Powell.
Milton Prater, Chewton Price, Henry Price, Herschel N. Price. Honored on our walls, Samuel Price, Warren Price, John Proctor, David H. Pugh, John Putnam, James H. Quall, Charles R. Quallis, Joseph Queer. Honored on our walls, Solomon Quinn, Edward Ragland, David Rainey, Joseph Ralston, Gaston Ralston, George Randolph. Honored on our walls, Francis Randolph, William J. E. Randolph, York Randolph, George E. Ransom, Robert Ransom, John Rattler, Noah Ratliff, Samuel Rayford, Edward Rayton. Honored on our walls, John Reddy, George Rivley, Henry Redd, Mordecai Redd, Newman Redd.
Richard Redmond, Sanford Redmond, William Redmond, William P. Redmond, Harvey C. Reed. Honored on our walls, Jeremiah Reed, Jesse Reed, John Reed, Joseph R. Reed, Lewis Reed, Samuel Reed, George Reese, Brooks Reeves, William Reeves, Absalom Rebels, George P. Reynolds, Malcolm Rice, Henry Richard, Othello Richard, Amos Richardson, Martin Richardson, David Rickman, John K. Rickman, Richard T. Rickman, William Rickman. Honored on our walls, Charles A. Ricks, Martin V. Ricks, James Riddle, Robert Riggs, Charles Rhine, Jefferson Rhine, Emmanuel Ringer.
Charles Rolls, Ambrose Roan, Alexander Roberts, Andrew Roberts, Charles H. Roberts, Isaac Roberts, Hasbury Robertson, Marion Robertson, Albert Robinson, John Robinson, Lewis Robinson. On our walls, Wiley W. Rowe, Albert Rogel, McCanary Rogers, Robert Rogers, Alexander D. Rollins, Theodore Roots, James H. Rose, Lafayette D. Rose, Ezekiel Rose, Isaiah Ross, James H. Ross, William C. Ross, Henry W. Runnels, George Rusk, James Russell, John Rideout. On our walls, William Salisbury, Annual J. Sampson, Archibald J. Sampson, William H. Sampson.
David Samuel, Isa Sanders, Paul Sandridge, Richard Sanford, Alonzo Savage. Honored on our walls, Nelson Sawyer, Green Sayers, Daniel Scott, James Scott, James E. Scott, John Scott, Jonah Scott, Jordan Scott, Joseph Scott, Joshua Scott, Perry Scott, Peter Scott, Robert Scott, Robert F. Scott, Tamberlane Scott, Walter Scott, Washington Scott, Wilbur J. Scott, William Scott, James M. Scrubs, Matthew Sears, Samuel Seaton, William Seaton, George C. Selden, Charles Selden, Henry Seward, Anderson Sewell.
William Shadsell, James C. Schaffer, Paige Shanak, Robert Chapateau, Julian Sharp, Lafayette Sharp, Riley Shaw, Richard Sheldon, Samuel Sheldon, William Shell, Sam Shelton, Wallace Shelton, Benjamin Shepard, Louis Sherman, Daniel R. Shimmer, Allison Shoecraft, John Shoecraft, Robert Shopto, Allison Showcraft, James W. Shuttleton, Wallace Shelton, Jerry Simmons, Henry Simons, Daniel Simpson, Edward Simpson, George Simpson. Honored on our walls, John T. Simpson, Joseph Simpson, Peter Simpson, Sublet Simpson. Honored on our walls, Thomas Simpson, Elias Stamnick.
John Slater, Ellis Slem, honored on our walls, William Slay, Alvin Smith, Anderson Smith, Charles Smith, Coleman C. Smith, Edmund H. Smith, Edward Smith, Ellis Smith, Elias Smith, Emmanuel Smith, Frederick Smith, George E. Smith, George L. Smith, Henry Smith, Harry Smith, Hiram Smith, Horatio Smith, Isaac Smith, Isaiah Smith, Jacob Smith, James Smith, James A. Smith, James M. Smith, John Smith, John T. Smith. Honored on our walls, Joseph H. Smith, Logan W. Smith, Marshall Smith, Nelson Smith, Peyton Smith.
Rip Smith, Samuel Smith, Wallace S. Smith, William Smith, William H. Smith, Francis M. Smithen, Francis M. Smithers. Honored on our walls, Isaac Solomon, Alexander Sowers, Samuel Spain, John W. Speaker, William N. Spear, William Spears, James Spotswood, Rufus Squires, Henry Staff. Honored on our walls, Joseph Steger. Honored on our walls, Elias Stamp, George Stanley, Addison Starks, Joseph Starks, James Steele, Orlando Steen, Orlando Stein, Thomas Stevens, William H. Steptoe, Isaac C. Stevens, John L. Stevens, Joseph G. Stevens. Honored on our walls, George Stevenson, Max Stevenson, Robert Green Stevenson. Alfred Stewart, Christopher Stewart, Hezekiah Stewart, James Stewart, Jeremiah Stewart, Lewis Stewart, Robert Stewart, William Stewart, Zephaniah Stewart, Isaac W. Stilgus, Enoch Stoglin, Enoch Stogling, Addison Stokes, Wesley Stokes, Randall T. Stonecker, Randall T. Stonecker, Robert Stotts, Reuben Strange, Henry Strauder, Charles Streblin, Henry Studer, Patterson Stonebridge, Henry Struder, Alfred Stewart, Isaac W. Styleglass, John Studdles. Honored on our walls, John P. Swan, Willis Swininger, Abraham Sweet, James E. Tabler, John Tabler, Thomas J. Tabler.
Pleasant Talbert, Brighton Tan, A.J. Tanner, James H. Tapsco, Andrew Tate, George W. Tate, Charles Taylor, Charles E. Taylor, Edward Taylor, Green Taylor, James H. Taylor, Jesse Taylor, John Taylor, John M. Taylor, Norvell W. Taylor, Robert Taylor. On our walls, Thomas M. Tellery, James O. Teeney, Scipio Terrence, Alfred Terry, Thomas Terry, Ebenezer Thacker, Alexander Thomas, Alfred M. Thomas, Cornelius Thomas, Esquire Thomas, George Thomas, Henry Thomas, Jacob Thomas, John Thomas, Martin Thomas, and William Thomas.
Cornelius Thompson, David G. Thompson, Edward Thompson, Garland Thompson, George Thompson, George W. Thompson, James A. Thompson, John Thompson, John W. Thompson, Josiah Thompson, Lewis Thompson, Seymour Thompson, Walter Thompson, William Thompson, William J. Thompson, Edward Thornton, Isaac Thornton, James S. Throp, Harvey Tibble, Qual S. Tibbs, Isaac Tilden, Paul Tolbert, Scipio Torrance, Henry Townsend, Alfred Travis, Franklin Treadwell, William Troutman, William True, Peter Trust, Dan Tucker. Honored on our walls, James W. Tucker, Thomas Tucker.
Honored on our walls, William Tucker, Marion Turk, Charles Turner, John H. Turner, John R. Turner, Peter Turner, Samuel Turner, Travis Turner, William Turney, William Underwood, John H. Valentine, Henry Van Washington, Henry Banyan, Sidney Vicks, Henry Vincent, Alan Vinnie, Gabriel Vinnie, Samuel F. Vinnie, Samuel Vorman, Andrew Wade, Benjamin S. Wade, Exum Wade, Frank Wade, Isaiah Watkins, Joseph J. Wakefield, L. Jesse Walden, Robert Waldron, Alexander Walker, Henry Walker, Houston Walker, James Walker, John Walker,
Ludlow Walker, Samuel Walker, Sherman Walker, James Wallace, Aaron Ward, George W. Ward, Henry Ward, James A. Ward, Jeremiah Ward, Joseph Ward. Honored on our walls, Joseph A. Waring, Andrew Warner, David Warren, Jerry W. Warren, Reuben Warwick, George Washington, John Washington, Isom Watkins, James Watkins, Robert Watkins, Hilliard Watson, William Watson, John Watts, Eli O. Woe, Banker Weekly, Arthur Webster, Henry Webster, Frank W. Weld, William Wellams, Henry Wells, Sidney Wells, William Wells.
Cornelius West, George West, Robert West, Banker Wetley, George Withley, Campbell Wheaton, John Wheeler, Zachariah Wheeler, Anderson White, Charles White, Gilbert White, Green White, Hamilton A. White, Harvey White, Henry White, Ira White, John White, Joseph White, Philip White, Samuel White, Tyler White, Wesley White, William White, James L. Whitfield, Henry Whittington, Charles W. Witzel, John Williams, John C. Williams, Jonathan Williams, Louise Williams, Neil Williams, Thomas Williams.
Wesley Williams, William Williams, Ison Williams, Samuel Wilmanson, John Willis, Anderson Wilson, Charles Wilson, Charles T. Wilson, Claiborne Wilson, Enoch Wilson, George W. Wilson. Honor on our walls, James Wilson, James H. Wilson, John Wilson, Lewis J. Wilson, Moses Wilson, Robert Wilson, Samuel Wilson, Thomas Wilson, John Winfield, James Wynn, James W. Wynn, Samuel Wynn, Riley Winner, Alfred Winslow, James Wise, John Wise, John A. Wise, John W. Wise, Solomon Wise, Anderson Wooden, and Warden Woodfalk.
David Woods, John Woods, Charles F. Woodson, Henry Woolley, John S. Woolridge, Green Wormley, Kenderson Wormley, Samuel Wren, Charles Wright, Charles J. Wright, James Wright, honored on our walls, Warren Wright, James Ryan, Robert Wyatt, John T. Yeager, Beverly C. Yancey, George Yancey, David York, George W. Yotes, Charles W. Young, George H. Young, Henry W. Young, James A. Young, John Young, Mac Young, Paul Young, honored on our walls, Richard Young, Simpson Younger, Richard Youngs, Edward Zeals, Charles Zimmerman.
That concludes the reading of the 27th USCT. While others around the country are reading other regiments, including Oberlin Historical Society, who are reading the 5th, we have many of those men on our walls because they came from Cleveland. So we will be reading the remainder of the names that are honored on our walls at this time. Honored on our walls, George Blake, USCT. Honored on our walls, James Cato, 9th USCT. Honored on our walls, Benjamin Dixon, 9th USCT. Honored on our walls, Levi Freeman, 9th USCT. Honored on our walls, William Johnson, 9th USCT. Honored on our walls, Henry Sterling, 9th USCT. Honored on our walls, Henry Boger, 5th USCT. Honored on our walls, John Brown, 5th USCT. Honored on our walls, Theodore A. Clark, 5th USCT. Honored on our walls, Robert Fletcher, 5th USCT. These are all honored on our walls. Benjamin W. Hamilton, 5th USCT. Washington Kennedy, 5th USCT. James May, 5th USCT. Daniel Morris, 5th USCT. Robert Robertson, 5th USCT. Charles Wheeler, 5th USCT. Frank Bowman, 17th USCT. Abram Dabney, 17th USCT. Reuben Grant, 17th USCT. John Robertson, 17th USCT. John Rose, 17th USCT. William Strange, 17th USCT. Charles Johnson, 16th USCT. Powell Miller, 16th USCT. William Sims, 16th USCT. Robert Watkins, 16th USCT. Henry Jackson, 13th USCT. Henry Matthews, 13th USCT. Jerry Myers, 13th USCT. Thomas Kempton, 12th USCT. Alfred Johnson, 12th USCT. Wade Reese, 12th USCT.
As Greg said, the names I'm about to read are honored on our walls. They are part of the 9,000 compatriots from the American Civil War remembered here. Lewis Reese, the 12th USCT. Henry Wheeler, 12th USCT. Waldo Goff, 107th USCT. Ohio Jackson, 101st USCT. John C. Cowan, 108th USCT. John W. Hughes, 48th USCT. James Alexander, 5th USCT. Ransom Bennett, 5th USCT. John Bowman, 5th USCT. John Burke, 5th USCT. William A. Carter, 5th. Gustav W. Farian, 5th USCT. Frank J. Ford, 5th USCT. George W. Hamilton, 5th USCT. John A. Harris, 5th USCT. John Jackson, 5th USCT. Lewis Jackson, 5th USCT. George Johnson, 5th USCT. William A. Mott, 5th USCT. Jefferson Pinckney, 5th USCT. William Salisbury, 5th USCT. John Simpson, 5th USCT. And William Slay of the 5th USCT. Thank you to all the presenters.
Thank you all. Thank you to our presenters. Thank you to our speakers today. And thank you for those that hung with us to read the USCT names. And congratulations to the African American Civil War Museum in Washington, D.C. on their grand reopening of their galleries after their redesign. We hope you have a wonderful Veterans Day, and thank you for your service.